With our framework well in place, we turn now to the interpretation of modern dreams. Beginning with men, we see how dreams reveal an unlived shadow side. The shadow is the same gender as the dreamer. I think it's really important that we recognize, too, that in our society, when the feminine is mentioned, people tend to think we are talking about women. But in this process of integration, in the individuation process, it is the relationship to the feminine within that is determining the relationship to the feminine without.
Inside everyone lurks the shadow. Behind the mask we wear for others, beneath the face we show ourselves, lives an unknown side of our personality. At night, when we lie helpless in our sleep, its image confronts us face to face.
Well, it was about 4 years ago, and I was in residential work, and I had a breakdown. And my mother, who'd been dead then about 13, 14 years, every night I kept dreaming of her, and somewhere up above me, she kept beckoning me to go to her. And I kept saying, no, I'm not ready to come yet. And she kept saying, you've got to come, I want you. And I said, well, you never wanted me when you was alive, and I'm not leaving Bob, and that's my husband. And this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And in the end, in one of my dreams, I told my mother all the things I'd felt about her when she was alive, and got it all off my chest, and I didn't have any more. But it was awful because I was frightened to go to sleep because I knew, this dream would recur every night. But she didn't want me when she was alive, and I thought, well, no way you're going to get me now. So it really was horrible. Yeah.
Dr. von Franz, dreams show us our unlived life through the figure of the shadow. Psychologically, what is the meaning of the word shadow?
That is simply a name we use for the fact that most people are not fully aware of all their personality traits. We like to imagine ourselves as being intelligent or generous or good-natured or practically gifted and whatnot. And there are other qualities of our conscious personality, inferior qualities, which we know somewhere. I mean, the surroundings tell us about them generally, and in quarrels it comes out. But we tend to push it into the shadow. We don't look at it. And when we think about ourselves, we forget about these qualities. Only our best friends and people we live with, our marital partners, can generally very clearly point out these more inferior traits.
I'd like you to interpret a rather amusing shadow dream of a 13-year-old boy.
I dreamt I was a huge eagle, and I was flying over the town, and I saw my friend Chris and Mike. They were walking to school. And so I swooped down, and I shit right on top of Chris's head, and he had to go home to wash his hair. And then I was sitting on top of his roof, and he was going back to school at lunch. And so I swooped down, and I shit right on top of his head again. And he went crying inside, and I thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever done.
In this dream we see again Gilgamesh and Enkidu, so to speak, in another variation. The two boys are friends, but they are also as contrasts. The friend onto whom he shits is more of an extrovert boy who likes collective sports and wants to go out. And the dreamer himself prefers individual plays and seems to be a more reflective character. And in the dream, it begins that he flies, he's an eagle and is flying. An eagle, in general, is, in heraldics, the eagle is always the animal of kings and leaders. And because one thought that, like the lion is the king of the wild animals, the eagle is the king of the birds. So he has something to do with the power drive, but also with spiritual elation, with high flights in thought and fantasy. It looks as if the dreamer has much more fantasy, capacities of fantasy than his extrovert friend. Now all introvert individualists secretly envy the extrovert because the extrovert is more successful collectively, and generally introverts have a certain feeling of inferiority towards extroverts. Extroverts have them too towards the other, but they never admit it. But the introverts generally admit that they envy the worldly successful friend. And therefore, in the dream, the balance is restored, that our dreamer as an eagle succeeds in shitting on his friend's head, and by that humiliating him. He has to go and get Mama's help, and he has naturally an elated feeling of triumph. One could look at the dream a bit suspiciously and say there is also a little warning in it that he shouldn't elevate himself too much above the friend, but I think it rather means a compensation, that he feels a bit uncertain or inferior towards his friend, and therefore the dream shows him the possibility, look here, you are the real eagle, you can shit on his head, so that's no problem.
Can the shadow also take a positive form?
Because of wanting to play a social role, most people identify more with their positive qualities, and therefore the shadow is generally more awkward, inferior, sometimes a bit evil, or socially unadapted. But that is not always so. There are people who prefer to live their worst side, and then their shadow is positive. There has been made studies among criminals who live, so to speak, the worst side of their personality, and then they have a positive shadow. They have a well-meaning helper of man as a shadow figure. But the normal average is that we identify or prefer to identify more with our positive and developed traits of character, and therefore push more the inferior side into the shadow. The most famous example is Mr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That is a literary representation where we can really see how man and his shadow live together and act upon each other. Everybody casts a shadow, so to speak, by the very fact that we are, for instance, if we use a lot of intellectual thinking, our feeling will be relatively inferior or undeveloped because we don't give it enough time. Or somebody who works mostly with machines and technical things tends to neglect his fantasy, his passive fantasizing, or his artistic gifts. And so the shadow, if we repress the shadow, we are only half people. That's why there are in literature such tales that the devil steals the shadow from people, and then they are, so to speak, in the claws of the devil, because we need a shadow. The shadow is what keeps us down to earth, which reminds us of our incompleteness, and which also provides us with complementations. We would be very poor if we were only what we imagine to be.
Could you give us some examples of where we see the shadow in everyday life?
I would say whenever we are tired or under stress, another personality breaks through. For instance, people who are very well-meaning and helpful suddenly become ruthlessly egocentric, push everybody else aside and become very nasty. Also, for instance, when people have the flu or are ill, suddenly you see their shadow side coming through. Or, for instance, you have people who are always in a good mood and cheerful and enterprising, and one day they become suddenly like ill-tempered bears, and you have a feeling, I've never seen that person that way. There's a sudden change of character. That's the breaking through of the shadow. It can take on 1,000 forms. Or for instance, you have a very good friend, and he lends you a book, and just that book your friend loses. He wants to nothing, the last thing to do, but his shadow wanted to play you a trick. That happens very often when people are jealous of each other. Then they play to the person of whom they are jealous. They play nasty tricks. They lose their objects, or they don't keep the appointments, and so on. And they have the best of intentions, but their shadow plays a role and does nasty tricks behind their own back. It's well known that, for instance, policemen and criminals have a shadow relationship to each other. Criminals are very good policemen if one makes them into one. And many policemen fight their own shadow in the outer form of criminals, and would have a criminal inclination themselves if they weren't policemen. And that is only one example which is well known in criminalistics. And we have all our favorite enemy, our best enemy, so to speak. That is generally our shadow. We have to, if somebody gets on one's nerves without reason, if somebody does some harm to you, then you can't say it's natural that you hate him or her. But if somebody doesn't do special harm to you, and you just feel madly irritated every time that person enters the room, you could just spit at them, then you can be sure that's the shadow. The best way then is to sit down and write a little paper on the characteristic of that person, and then look at it and say, that's me. I have done that once when I was 18, and I blushed so that I was sweating blue in the face when I had done that. It's a real shock to see one's shadow.
Well, about 3 days ago, I had a dream which involved a tiger that suddenly appeared in my house. And the tiger, I never really actually saw its body. All I actually saw was the head. And in our house here at Eton, we have long passages with doors on either side of our own individual rooms. And I remember being in the bathroom, and this tiger was trying to grab me around the door. It had its head right underneath the door, and its neck was thin enough to actually get underneath the door. And I remember standing there pushing really, really hard against the door. I wasn't particularly frightened. It just appeared to me to be really against me. And I wasn't particularly frightened of it. I just didn't want it to come in. Friends at the other end of the bathroom weren't at all worried about it, and I was. I was the only person that actually had any qualms about this tiger trying to get in.
The more the people are righteous and therefore never leave their shadow side, the more they project it. The others are always the evildoers, and that's where they live in a constant righteous indignation and really hunting down their own shadow in the form of the outer person.
I just can't stand it if someone's got it wrong and I know that I've got it right. You know, I do have a temper, yeah.
Clergymen are very problematic natures because the community expects them to always be mild and friendly and helpful and virtuous, and the poor man or woman has a shadow too naturally. So then they can't live their shadow, and if they live it, the whole community howls against them, and so they generally spend their relationship to evil by seeing it in other people and preaching against it. Is that too poisonous?
Dr. von Franz, why are we so often chased or threatened in our dreams?
Very often shadow figures pursue us, burglars or all sorts of enemies pursue us. And in general, one can say that if something in the dream pursues us, it wants to come to us. If only we could, it demonstrates that something which belongs to us and wants to come towards us, but we are afraid of it. And by being afraid, we lend it an evil figure. Could we turn round and accept it, it would probably become more benevolent. Naturally, all rules about dream interpretation are paradoxical. We are sometimes pursued by powers in the unconscious where in the dream we can only escape. It is right to escape. There are destructive tendencies in the psyche which we have to avoid. But 80% of what pursues us in dream really wants to come towards us.
I had the damnedest dream. I was up at the cottage out in the woods with my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, and a mutual friend of ours who helped build a cottage, in fact. He's a really down-to-earth, woodsy kind of fella. Really, really good person. And the three of us are up there in the woods, and suddenly this hairy ape creature appears again. And it's making a pass at my girlfriend. And I didn't like that at all, and I was ready to lunge at it, when this friend of ours puts his hand on my shoulder and says, "Wait a minute, I'll help you we'll take care of this together, and we'll get rid of him." And I looked around and I said, "No, I'll deal with him." My girlfriend, right? So I went out at this hairy ape creature, and I started talking to it, telling it, "No, you can't have her. She's mine." And it turned out to be quite reasonable. I was quite surprised, and it turned around and walked back into the woods.
The shadow is not at all 100% evil. I have already mentioned that in criminals sometimes they have even noble personalities as a shadow. But even in the ordinary man in our civilization, the shadow is very often a kind of harmless brute, or the more natural man, the man without good manners. The nature person, but not at all an evil person, and even something which likable and very important to have with one. Our ego and is by our education forced to wear a lot of masks and to behave in a unnatural form, and therefore we repress all sorts of natural animal reactions and simple human reactions out of politeness and good manners and whatever the situation requires. For people to learn to know their shadow and to live their shadow a bit more, it makes them generally more accessible and more natural and more round and human altogether. People without shadow who are perfect inflict an inferiority on their surrounding and irritate their surrounding. And that's why one is so relieved if something nasty happens to them and say, "Thank God he's also only human." I've noticed that analysts try to be very correct with their patients, but sometimes there's a slip-off. And I've often noticed that when I produce a real slip-off in an analytical hour and the patient can make me powerful reproaches, it improves our relationship, because the analysants feel, "Oh, after all, von Franz is only human, and now I feel above her and I'll pardon her." And that's a good feeling. And then one has a more natural human being to human being relationship. The shadow is really our best social function. It integrates us into the group. With our good qualities, we are above the group. With our shadow, we are man among men, and human all too human. And that's why the shadow is very often in dreams represented as something important, or which one should love or accept or not look not scorn, but fully accept within oneself.
I was in a large house, a mansion as it's called, and there's an exhibition of paintings and drawings there, and in a series of large rooms. And the artist is a man called Szabo, and I remember this very clearly, S-C-Z-A-B-O, a name that means absolutely nothing to me. And yet the paintings, the drawings of animals sort of seem familiar. And then I was in another room, large room outside the exhibition. There were a lot of people there. My host was there. It was obvious they were getting ready for a cocktail party. And someone comes up to me, a man, and says, what costume, what coat are you going to wear? And starts to hand me a painter's smock. And I say, no, that's not me.
How would you account for the man in the dream offering you a smock?
Well, that's probably the costume I should be wearing if I were going to get serious about some of the things I should do.
Returning to the idea of projecting the shadow, is that what lies behind the scapegoat?
It is well known from group dynamisms that it is so terribly awkward to live and to be aware of one's own shadow that if somebody else within a group, or let's say in a family, does something nasty, everybody is relieved, because now you can say, it's the other who did it. We have a proverb, the good man pays great attention if the other does also evil. So they can say, it's the other, it's not me. And that plays a great role in the so-called scapegoat psychology, and how in certain groups, and mainly also in a family, sometimes one child or one member of the family takes on the role of doing all the evil the other would like to do and don't dare to do. And then the others push that person more and more into that evil role. And probably even in the criminal in society has a similar role. He's like a negative redeemer. He redeems society from having to face its own shadow, because then they can say, it's that fellow who did the murder. I only wished to do it, but didn't dare to do it. And so if somebody has a weak personality, a weak ego, he can even succumb to suggestions and act out shadow things which other people really wish or desire. It's very difficult. In the shadow side of our personality, we are very much mixed up with the surrounding world, and it's very difficult, and therefore it is very important to know our shadow and to keep it out of the group phenomenon. Otherwise we weigh down our surrounding with all our unlived nasty qualities. And that's why, for instance, in the antiquity, the old Greeks and the old Jews and many other populations have the idea of a purification of the community by choosing some people as scapegoats and sacrificing them or driving them out into the desert, and they take all the sins of the community with them. They carry the projection, they are the shadow, they pay for it, and then the others feel, so to speak, all right again. And perhaps some people can also remember that at a party, as they say, the devil suddenly got into them. And with a little bit of alcohol, they suddenly misbehave terribly. And the next morning when they wake up, they can't understand how they did all these things and said all these things they said. That is generally not only a breakthrough of their own shadow, but of the group shadow. The evil of, they acted out not only their own evil, but the evil of all other people as well.
Would you talk about Nazi Germany in that regard?
They projected mainly the shadow onto the Jews. That was the scapegoat. And they called the Jews, they accused the Jews mainly of being greedy for money, sensuously seducing and defiling all their women and striving for world power. Now, the Nazis clearly strove for world power. Money was their aim number one. Even if a Jew gave a lot of money, then he wasn't elected to be not a Jew. With money, they threw over all their principles, and they defiled their own women by turning them into cows who had to produce soldiers. No recognition of the woman as a human being in Nazism at all. So you can say all these things which they mainly accused the Jews were just what they were doing. Or for instance, at the beginning of the war, Hitler said of Churchill, "That criminal who pulls one little country of Europe after the other and into his powers and ruins it." Tableau, who did that?
Could you tell me a dream which reveals the creative side of the shadow?
I remember a man who had a great gift in writing and who should have written his thesis for the Jung Institute. And he had always dreams that powerful animals pursued him, and I interpreted that his creativity wanted to reach him, but he didn't accept it. He always said it was sexuality. Now, actually, he had a woman friend and had very satisfactory and lots of sex, and therefore I didn't believe his interpretation. But he didn't want and couldn't write till he dreamt that he was pursued by a bull, and he ran, and the bull was after him, coming closer and closer. And in the last minute, he jumped over a fence, and the bull stood still and went onto his hind legs, and he looked back and saw the erected penis of the bull, and it was a ballpoint. So I said, now there you are. After that, he wrote an excellent thesis.
In working with the mother archetype, it's very important to remember that the feminine is a force of nature, an energy that can either give life or take it away. Children attempting to function in an atmosphere that cannot sustain life suffer bodily and psychically. They fear life itself. The compensating dream will be of a loving mother. Now, other children blessed with parents who are able to give them the honey of life may have strong, positive feminine images compensating for the loss in the culture. The one is an individual loss, the other a cultural loss. The full moon is one of those radiant images that can bring the dreamer into himself, then take him off the ground into a universal world of stars and spheres, and he can become lost in the harmony of that space. It is very important with such dreams that you recognize the compensation essential to stay on the ground and not be lost in the harmony of the spheres.
Every man has a girl of his dreams, a divine image of beauty and perfection. Jung called a man's inner woman his anima, which is Latin for soul. She animates life. She can inspire a man or devour him, but whether he likes it or not, it's the male's fate to pursue his soul through life. We're constantly searching for the girl of our dreams.
Oh, last night I dreamed that his girlfriend showed up at the kite stand today, and we were all going to go out on the boat. We were supposed to go out on his brother's boat, and I thought she showed up, and I thought it was really strange because yesterday he told her to go fly a kite, not, he didn't want to be with her anymore. And I thought, here she is again. That's all I remember.
Dreams
I have good ones. My dreams are usually things sexual. They usually come true. No. Usually about my girlfriends.
The normal dreams of a man are surely about wives, you see. That is absolutely normal.
Do you have any dreams?
Yeah, wet ones.
Wet one.
All the time.
This was a fairly nasty idea, but she came up slowly towards me, and she sat down next to me, you see. And at this moment, I became acutely aware of her presence because I could feel her wet leg against my wet leg, and I could feel my heart beating against this.
Do you have a dream girl?
Oh yeah, I got a dream girl.
Who's your dream girl?
Malena.
Malena. Malena.
Oh, I forgot her last name. She's gonna kill me. Brown. Suntan. Brown. Blue eyes. Blonde. Typical Californian girl. That's why we're here.
No, I can't. I have to see her. Then I know what kind of girl it is.
Have you ever seen her?
In California, no.
When I'd see her, I'd know her. Other than that, I won't make any commitments.
Did you ever see her?
No. Not yet. I'm still looking, though.
Did you have a woman of your dreams?
I've been outside.
The girl in my dream I'm married to. Oh, she's about 5'5", 130 pounds. Built pretty nice. Measurements is 36, 24, 36. Healthy.
I was walking along a city street in the rain, mid-afternoon, with a friend. I don't know who the friend was, except that it was a man. We looked up, and to the left, to our left, was an empty window, dark. To the right was another window in which sat a young woman in her early 20s. She had long, mousy brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. It was greasy and almost dead. Her face, too, was dead. There was no expression in it at all. She simply sat staring out into the street, and yet not staring at anything. There was no focus in her eyes.
A woman of your dream.
Often.
Who is she?
I wish I knew.
I've dreamt about every kind of woman imaginable. I've dreamt about Marilyn Monroe, the Queen, beautiful one at a well, my mother, virgins, prostitutes, fat ones, thin ones, black ones, white ones. I've even dreamt about you. How is a man supposed to make sense out of this incredible number of forms that his femininity takes in his dreams?
The anima has many stages and embraces a great range of psychological facts. Jung once divided it in four: Eve, Helena, Mary, and Sophia, the wisdom of God. Eve would be the biological woman, and when she appears as an anima, she would be the biological sex, the physical attraction, motherhood, the image of the ordinary attractive female. Helena is on a higher stage. She would represent the hetaira, as the Greeks, for instance, developed a type of their form of geishas, the hetaira, cultivated women with whom one had not only a sexual adventure, but with whom one exchanged poetry and philosophical conversations, where the man had also a spiritual companion in the woman, a companionship, together with romantic sex. The next stage is the anima figure of in Christianity of the Virgin Mary, which is the highest form of spirituality, but a bit one-sidedly too high up. The Virgin Mary is lacking the dark Eve side of woman, the earthy side of woman. So it is a bit a too lofty ideal. And when the church abolished the cour d'amour, they forced the knights to worship the Virgin Mary instead. And at the same time they began the witch hunting. That means the dark side, the shadow side, or the more biological and wilder, the more natural side of the anima is too much excluded from the ideal of the Virgin Mary. And therefore the fourth stage is the wisdom of God is, as Jung smilingly quoted, is a come down, because wisdom is not most virtuous spirituality. It is closer to life. It would be when a man knows how to love women and knows how to relate to women but having wisdom at the same time. The wisdom which protects him from their devouring side. The highest form of love is also something with a grain of salt in it.
And what do you mean by that?
I won't say.
And where do you see the anima manifest in life?
On a primitive level, it appears in men generally as an element of romantic, unreal, mostly sexual fantasies. And you see, for instance, in puberty, when young men are very active and then suddenly they become passive and dreamy and they are not there, and their performance in school goes down tremendously, and one has the feeling, where is that? Where has that young man disappeared? He's in the clutches up to the neck of daydreaming sexual fantasies. In that age, it is a normal transition. But if a man gets stuck in indulging in wishful sexual fantasies, he literally falls into the hand of a vampire. He loses his capacity of taking his own life in hand. He loses his willpower. He loses all his male efficiency. And he just daydreams all the time about women and their curves and would-be romantic adventures and so on. He lives in an unreal life. I saw once a man who was 43, still living with his mother, who had never approached a woman. I asked him, what on earth are you doing with your sex? And he gave a secretive smile and didn't confess. He just masturbated wildly every night. And then he dreamt that he was in daytime living an ordinary life, but in the nighttime he was living on a luscious island where he had wild sexual adventures with women. That was the fantasy world into which he had disappeared. In a primitive tribe, one would say such a man has been bewitched. He's bewitched.
We would say he's locked into an infantile attitude to life. He's being devoured by the mother. Would you tell us some of the rituals which primitive societies had to break that dependency on the symbolic mother?
All the big transitions in life are in all societies have been accompanied by so-called what Genep calls rite de passage, rites of transition, to make a ritual to help people to make the step over the threshold. Now, the most famous one, which has been studied mostly by ethnologists, is the ritual of initiation, where the young men are initiated into the secrets of the tribal law and into the secrets of sexuality. And they have to leave mother and their home. They are secluded in the bush. They are symbolically devoured by a maternal monster. They are reborn. They have to generally stand a lot of tortures they are sometimes also homosexually assaulted by the older men with the idea of injecting them masculinity. And then they are generally at the same time instructed with the secret law of the tribe and the religious traditions. And if somebody, and a young man has undergone all this ritual of transition, then he is afterwards a full member of the tribe, he's a man. And many tribes call the ones who are afraid, who are for some other reason not initiated, they say, he's not initiated, he's an animal. Meaning he has remained completely unconscious, he has remained in an unconscious animal conditions. He has not really made the step to being human.
Are there any societies where there is no rite of passage, where men remain in that state of dependency on the mother, where they stay animals?
Well, we have not many sociological matriarchies, but I read once a book about a South American Indian tribe where there was actually sociological, not religious, but sociological matriarchy. And there, the women were happy, fat whores, ordering the men about, and the men were lean, submissive, nervous creatures who were planting the fields and doing the work for the women, kind of porters' figures. And positively, wealth, the world of the drives, sexuality, earthly happiness was blossoming. And negatively, there was no spirit whatsoever. A world of total stupidity, so to speak, of only living. Living very agreeably, but not thinking or having any ideas or spiritual realizations at all. And the men accordingly unhappy and submissive and rather poor creatures. But generally, these things balance back and forth. There will be another generation of men who will, in male protest again, put the things into a middle position or try to put the things in a middle position. It seems to be, the ideal seems to be not that either the men dominate or the women dominate, but that there is a kind of equal relationship, a balance of opposites.
And this demon woman, this devouring mother, how does she come together in a man's unconscious in the first place?
The devouring mother on the personal level would be the fact that many women who are over-caring for their children try to keep them back from life. It begins by being anxious. Don't do that, it's dangerous. Don't do that, it's dangerous. Don't go to play out with the boys. You could fall and wound, or you get hit over the head. And by trying to keep the children too much in their clutches, and then we speak of devouring mothers. And such mothers also have trouble when their sons and daughters begin to date girls or boys. They say, I'm very much wishing that you married, and I'm very glad, but that girl you bring home now, no, that is not the right girl for you, or that's not the right boy for you. So they keep the children in their clutches, but that is only the foreground of a woman who has exaggerates her maternal protective qualities. There is also an archetypal background.
When a man idealizes a woman and projects his anima onto her, he gives her tremendous power. Why is it dangerous for a woman to identify with that projection? Or like Marilyn Monroe, to become the love goddess and live out his desires?
Because, as we know from the life history of Marilyn Monroe, she did not live her own life. She acted all the time the anima of men. Generally, there are women, and that is ultimately due to the power drive. When women discover that if they are beautiful, they can exert a magic power over men, then they take to acting all the time the anima. We are even in our jargon sometimes talking about anima women. Those are women who find out how to act the anima to men. And because this is not love, but pure power drive, it is destructive to the men and to themselves. Because it's using the guise of love for worldly power. Such women want to rule the men, they want the men to be all at their feet, and then they naturally are unhappy because they don't feel loved. I remember when I was young, sometimes when a man projected his anima onto me and was pursuing me and giving me presents and so on, I had the distinct feeling, but that fellow doesn't know me at all. He's chasing an image. I wanted to look back. Who is he chasing? It's not me. Me as a human being he doesn't see. And so if a woman falls into the trap of acting out the anima, she can exert a tremendous power over men. But at the same time, inwardly, she's frustrated because those men love her image, they don't love her. So she's really very lonely underneath. And that's what caught up with poor Marilyn Monroe.
And does this woman who's playing the anima, does she just fulfill the man's needs? Anything he wants, she does, or how does it work?
It works as long as it is an adventure or a love affair. Then she fills out his needs. But when he has to live with her, if he marries her and has to live with her in everyday life, then comes the trouble. She will play the anima to all the other men as well, and he'll not like that. And secondly, he'll suddenly discover that underneath that beautiful mask, there is no human being. There's no warmth. There's no possibility of a human relationship. So to marry an anima figure is most disappointing. And that these women who play that are called by the French femme fatale, women who ruin men.
If a man has this mother complex, then how does he experience women in real life?
If a man has a too close tie to his mother, then he, especially a positive one, then he tends to idealize women. He sees in every woman the Beatrice of Dante, so to speak, or the Virgin Mary. And then such men cannot approach women again with their lower parts, with sexually and in ordinary human life. Or they have a split anima situation. They admire a very unapproachable, lofty, beautiful girl from afar and satisfy their sexual desires with prostitutes and cannot bring the two ends together. They cannot put the princess and the bitch together, so to speak, in their psyche. And that is generally due to a too close tie to the mother in the man. He has to free himself from the mother. That's why, for instance, in one of the famous examples of such a princess in the tower, Rapunzel, she's imprisoned by a witch. It's the mother figure behind the scene, which brings forth the constellation. And then both lovers cannot meet on earth. And only when Rapunzel has come down on earth and he has erred around in the desert in misery and pain can they finally meet.
Some men find their devouring mother out in life, in corporations, universities, or institutions of some kind.
I think one element of the devouring mother archetype is what one could call inertia. All big institutions have the tendency towards a certain inertia. They are not flexible. And therefore they are, so to speak, material blocks, situations which are just so. And as far as men have a mother complex, they feel, well, the universities are even called, were in the past called alma mater, the benevolent mother. And we see that whenever you have an institution, people tend to be infantile and to suck that institution for money, to ask for loads and stipendia, and to use them as benevolent mothers. And so the mother can easily be, the devouring mother can be easily projected onto a plant or a big organization or an institute or a university. They have even feminine names, and if in former times when one represented them, one represented the alma mater as a fat woman, and America is still represented by a fat woman holding up, at least she's holding up a light, that's making it a bit better.
But is there a light on top of that fat old woman? Everywhere I look, I see the principle of mother-relatedness is breaking down. The institutions that once contained us, the church, family, marriage, even the economy, no longer provides that security. Where do you see the light?
Well, I would say through the panicky feeling of the danger of a nuclear war. For instance, you see that people, and through the suddenly realizing the problem of pollution, there has been a basic change in many, mainly the young people, but also I think already my generations was fully aware of that we will have to basically change our way of life in some way. There is still a lot of quarreling and discussing how and why and in what form and so on. But I think everybody agrees we have to find some way of peacefully live together and not destroy each other by a nuclear war. We have to deal differently with nature than we have done up till now. And we have to change our too rational mode of life. I would say that is going through. If you think of a book of Marilyn Ferguson, The Aquarian Conspiracy, you see that there is, this book only gives the absolute surface of things, the only superficial aspect, but you see that everywhere there is a parallel change of attitude, which with the German word one expresses as Zeitgeist, as spirit of the time. In history, this is well known. For instance, if you look at the art of the 13th century as compared to the Renaissance art, you see how much the spirit of the time has changed. In those few hundred years, suddenly, as if collectively the whole mankind has a different outlook. In the medieval art, everything is concentrated on the divine. There's no perspective, there's practically no landscape, there's no representation of animals, trees, and worldly things. And then in the Renaissance, suddenly this switch to discovering nature, the human body, the perspective of space and of space, the different building. Now that is only a very striking change which everybody knows in retrospect, but such a striking change seems to me to be constellated again today, and that's why naturally keenly interested intellectual people cannot avoid asking the question, what is the change of our time? What is our situation? Especially under the threat of a nuclear war, which preoccupies practically everybody's mind. There is a kind of desperate look at the sky. What does it mean to? How could we change? What is coming? What is ahead of time? This kind of anxiety is everywhere. We are still living in an age, or at the end of an age, where the opposites, Jupiter and Saturn, good and evil, spirit and instinctual physical drive, are in great opposition. We are torn apart by opposites, which in political terms, would amount to any minute having a war. You have even on one side of the Iron Curtain an anti-Christian principle ruling, and on the other side, officially still a Christian outlook ruling. So the Iron Curtain is dividing Jupiter and Saturn, so to speak. That's only the earthly image of what is happening on a much deeper level in the human psyche of every individual.
Mother Nature is the womb of all life. She gives endlessly without reservation. But she's also the tomb. She kills and devours all living things. In childhood, a man looks to his mother to fulfill his needs. But on entering adulthood, he puts behind those childhood expectations. The passage isn't easy, and many men get stuck. They remain eternal sons, locked in a state of dependency on the mother. The passage rite is called Slaying the Dragon. Dr. von Franz, what are nightmares? Why do we have them?
Well, nightmares are really, you could say, most substantially vital, important dreams. They wake you up with a cry and they are the electroshock nature uses on us when nature wants to wake us up. The word nightmare comes from mare, and the idea was that an evil ghost in form of a black horse or so on was riding you in the night, and then you woke up with a cry and woke up completely exhausted. The waking up point of a dream means the bang with which the unconscious says, now that is it, now attend to that. And so the nightmare is really shock therapy. It wants to shock us out of a deep unconscious sleepiness about some dangerous situation. When we have nightmares, it means we are in a psychological danger of some sort and much too sleepy and unaware about it. And then we have a nightmare to wake us up. The nightmare has a characteristic of a certain urgency, as if the unconscious would say, look here, that problem is urgent. For instance, they are naturally the incubus or succubus, that means the male partner attacking a woman in the dream or vice versa, shows the sexual problem is urgent, has to be attended to, has to be made conscious. One cannot just push it aside and pretend it doesn't exist.
We filmed a dream that presents precisely that problem. The animal is very seductive, but she's very dangerous.
Well, this was a most unusual dream, in my way of thinking, because it brought me in contact and also to realize that certainly within the mind there exists, most certainly, a vampire, or vampires as such, but certainly they do exist in the mind, let's say. And the dream began very strangely when out of the rain and darkness appears this very beautiful Brazilian lady, and she had a woolen, it may have been a very dark green woolen coat down to her ankles, very thick and heavy, and her hair was black and she was beautiful, and her hair and coat were wringing wet as a result of being out in the rain. And this didn't seem to bother her, so she came towards me, towards my right, and she's standing in front of me. And that moment in time, something told me that I'd met this woman before. In fact, something hinted to me that maybe she really was a vampire and not so beautiful as she appeared to be. And I was hesitant to do anything about her, and she smiles and beckons that I come towards her. But I was resistant, and she opened her coat finally, and she had a beautiful bikini on, and her body was very black and beautiful and shiny in the rain, and I was very tempted. And finally, I went over to her and I put my arms around her in an embrace. I looked at her mouth and I noticed that the two front teeth were missing, which gave me a clue that maybe she really was a vampire, but I wasn't absolutely positive. And she says, John, she said, I don't want your hand, I want your penis, I want you to make love to me. And I said, oh, no way, because if I do that, then I'll be lost. Once I enter into her, she'll become into a real vampire, and then I'll be finished. And so I decide to withdraw and resist the temptation, and I move backwards towards the door of my house. She's very angry at this, and somehow or other, she's so angry, I seize hold of a screwdriver. I want her to go away, I don't want her around me, and I rattle her teeth with this screwdriver. And at that point in time, it's then that I notice that the side teeth have in fact grown and extended themselves down to about here. And they are really fangs. In fact, she really is a vampire, and I wasn't mistaken. And I'm even more afraid. So I turn to my right and I run into the house and I attempt to lock the door. And somehow or other, the door doesn't seem to lock very well. And I don't know whether I'm locking the door or whether I'm unlocking the door. And then something tells me that the mechanism of the door lock, is in fact faulty. Then it suddenly occurs to me that no matter even if I lock the door, this vampire has the ability of transforming itself from whatever person to whatever position it wants to, so there's really no escape.
The anima is the archetype of life, and it is, when the anima is negative, it is the impulse to dream about life and to make wishful fantasies about life instead of living life. And that's why vampires and Draculas and the creatures alike always suck one's blood. The blood is the emotional, active psyche in us, the affect psyche. And such people have no activity left or no life activity left. They just sink into a passive, wishful dream. The dream tries to tell him it's a ghost which is haunting me, because actually he's haunted not by reality, he's haunted by a fantasy, which is draining his whole psychic energy.
At the end of the dream, the man's unable to escape from the vampire. It's going to suck the blood out of him. How would you interpret that?
That is really the characteristic of most negative or split-off complexes. If we reject or split off some complex of our psyche, then it begins to sap our energy secretly, behind our back, so to speak. And then it turns slowly into what is aptly represented by the image of a vampire, something which attacks us in the night and sucks all our blood. People feel they don't know, they come into analysis and they say, I feel listless, I just feel tired, I just don't want to do anything, I wake up already in the morning depressed, nothing means anything to me anymore. We could answer to them, you are probably sucked by a vampire, you are bloodless, you have no life impulse, no pleasure in life anymore, no interest or anything. And then you generally find that this vampire is just a split-off complex which has been split off so radically and so powerfully that it can only sap energy anymore. It cannot manifest in any other way anymore.
Why are the movies about death goddesses and vampires so popular?
I think all movies which touch essential psychological facts, the movies nowadays more or less replace the fairy tale telling and the myth telling. It's our modern form of myth and fairy tales. And therefore, movies which tell about the inner world, like fairy tales do, are much more attractive to the public, because we really need myths to have an orientation or to have mapping out the dream world or the unconscious. And in past time, there were the innumerable myths of vampires, which fascinated people. tales retold all over the world. In China, for instance, you have a whole host of ghost stories where a man meets a fox, and then the fox is really the ghost of a dead and turns up as a beautifully made-up girl, and he has a marvelous life with her till one day he discovered that she's an evil demon, she's a skeleton. And then sometimes it ends bad, she pulls him into death, or he can, with the help of priests and magicians, free himself from the demon. And we, for instance, in the Swiss Alps, we have stories that our cowherds high up in the mountain who have to live there the whole summer alone without having women. Every night the Dockeli comes, that is a female ghost, comes through the door invisibly and rides them all the night, and they have sexual pollutions, and in the morning they wake up completely exhausted and can't practically move anymore, overwhelmed, so to speak, by sexual fantasies and by the unlived life.
If the man's feelings are locked in to the mother complex, if his life is being sucked away by the vampire, then how can he transform those feelings? How can he get free of the mother complex?
I once met the dream of a young man who was living still with Mama. He was 29 and had never had a girl in his room. And so we seriously discussed the possibility of getting a room outside his mother's home. And he was terrified. He was a very sensitive, delicate boy, and his mother was a very brutal, strong personality, and he was just terrified of the moment to tell Mother, look here, I am going to take a room outside and I'm not going to live with you anymore. And when he was kind of trying to make up his mind, he dreamt that he had to slay the dragon. So that, in that case, it means actually that though it seems such a, to us, little thing to tell Mother, I have to room, for him that was slaying the dragon. It was overcoming a monstrous neurotic difficulty within himself. His whole mother complex, and not only facing the scene of his actual mother, but overcoming also the inertia and the anxiousness of his own mother complex. His mother had sowed in him an anxiousness, a fear of life. He had to overcome a terrific fear of life to make that step. And that is an archetypal motif all over the place, that the young man has to do the heroic deed of killing his mother, or the mother dragon, or the mother demon, which is what is anxious or lazy or afraid of living a masculine life.
Now I'd like to introduce you to one of my women. She was in a dream that I had when I was studying here in Zurich. And I think I might be interested in what you have to say about her. In this dream, I was walking beside a jungle area, and a rolling green sort of veldt land beside the jungle, with a gorgeous black woman. And we had known each other for a long time, some way or other, and I called her my goddess. It was my pet name for her. And she said, I got a problem. And I didn't understand what she meant. And she took her dress and bared her shoulder, and she was peeling from the sun. And under, where the top skin came off, underneath the black, it was white. And she said, if I keep seeing you, it's going to happen all over my body. She said, I've got to talk to my mother and get some advice from her on what to do. And I didn't know what to do, and we walked on, and there were some farm implements still by this jungle, and all of a sudden 2 black guys came running out of the jungle, and they were going to take her back to the village in the jungle. And I said to them, hell, I'd rather die than have that happen. You're not going to do that. And they just came at me. And I said, I mean it. And I said, I'll fight you, but you're not going to take her back. And I had some crazy, wild courage that I wish I had for real life. And I took these 2 guys on, and I woke up winning. I was winning, and it really felt good when I woke up.
This transformation of this beautiful black woman on a hot summer day reminds one of very old tradition. If you remember, the Song of Solomon begins, I am black but beautiful, or daughters of Zion, and so on. There is the black Shulamite who is transformed also later, according to medieval tradition, into a white woman. She's redeemed by Christ into becoming a white woman by her bridegroom. And this motif has played a tremendous role also in the legend of the Queen of Sheba, the ancestress of the Ethiopian kings. She is a black woman who came to meet Solomon, and she was identified with the Shulamite of the Song of Solomon, and she was a Negroess who was the beloved of a white man. And that has always fascinated Western mythology. This transformation, this meeting the black woman and transforming her into a white woman in time. You have it also in the Grail legend, where in Wolfram von Eschenbach, Feirefies, the best friend and half-brother of Parzival, marries Bella Cane. She's the daughter of a white man and a black woman, and she's speckled black and white, and has a speckled son, Feirefies. The mixing of black and white, the mixing of the opposites of the light and the dark. In alchemy, in alchemical tradition, also the transformation of the Shulamite or the Queen of Sheba plays a tremendous role. It's a one of the big recurring fantasies of the alchemists, that the first matter which they want to transform into gold is black, and is compared to a black woman which takes off her skin or black garment and then transforms into pure gold. And here she has a golden white skin. There is even the allusion to the gold, to this transformation. These black garments represent a typical feature of an undeveloped inner anima figure. That would mean that his whole capacity of love is mostly autoerotic. When a man has not developed his anima, his feminine side is generally very narcissistic. That's what women painfully feel, that when a man in love is meowing under her window like a tomcat in love, he really loves his own fantasy. He loves his own being in love. But there's a long way for him to learn to love her and not enjoying his own being in love. And if you read in literature a young man, when he generally discovers the experience of love, it's mostly a completely autoerotic fantasy, out of which he has, through a painful development, learned to love the woman not as the object of his romantic fantasies, but as a human partner.
What does this inner transformation mean in terms of the man's relationship to an actual woman in outer life?
The peeling of the black anima and her transformation in a white golden anima is the transformation of the loving capacities of a man, of a transformation of his eros, from a primitive autoerotic fantasy into a true human capacity for love. As soon as this transformation takes place, he then is attacked by primitives who want to keep the woman, that she should remain black and stay with the blacks in a black village. So there is a strong primitive tendency to relapse again into the old attitude, but the dreamer can successfully fight it off.
What happens if the man's feelings are not transformed? If he stays locked into the maternal mode of relationship, with a woman fulfilling his needs and fantasies, or a corporation or an institution or a university, some other substitute? Is he in fact living out the Oedipal myth?
The Oedipal myth is a very complicated thing, in spite of what the Freudians say. And one cannot really look at it separately from the Greek tradition. When a man has to overcome the mother demon, and that was the moment when Oedipus had to answer the riddle of the Sphinx, who is a maternal mother demon, a devouring mother figure. He did it by giving a witty intellectual answer. That is a way how certain men escape the devouring mother. They do not slay the dragon, they outwit the dragon, so to speak. Nowadays, those are the men who study theoretical physics and become very intelligent and knowing all the mathematics, and therefore having a masculine realm of their own where their mother cannot follow them. They build up a kind of mental masculine world. Such an escape into the intellectual or scientific realm has been, for instance, done by the society around Socrates and Plato in Greece. That was an escape into a pure men's society of philosophers and scientists among themselves. And we know that they were mostly homosexual, or that Socrates didn't get on with his wife Xantippe at all, had a very unhappy marriage. In other words, the problem of the feminine and the getting away from the mother is only seemingly achieved. There must be another round in the battle with the Great Mother. And that is what the Oedipus myth mirrors. Oedipus thinks he has answered the riddle of the Sphinx and happily goes off having outwitted her. And she, in her evil witch-like behavior, pretends to commit suicide. So to give him that illusion, now I've overcome the mother with the powers of the mind. And he just runs into marrying his own mother, with all the tragedy and the divine punishment which befalls him on account of that. So this myth shows that the masculine intellectual overcoming of the devouring powers of the unconscious is not enough. It has to be done by the way one lives, not by the way one thinks. Just as it wouldn't help the young man who has to take a room for himself to understand that he has a mother complex and that all his neurotic symptoms comes from his mother tie. He has to actually take the other room and stand the battle.
If he takes the other room, does he have to understand why he's doing it?
Yes, certainly. Otherwise, at the next occasion, when he runs out of money, he moves back to Mama again. Perhaps he finds a disagreeable landlady in his first room, so he moves back home again. He has to understand why he does it, and that it is vitally essential for him, that it is not just a technical change in his life.
The feminine side of a man's personality is his feeling relationship with himself and with life. And we have many symbols in our society which carry the projection of men's feelings. The poet Shelley, for example, he projected his feelings of loneliness and alienation onto the moon. He asked if she was pale from weariness of climbing heaven. The moon also carries the projection of a rising feminine in this dream of a university professor.
I was driving in a car with a young woman. At the beginning of the dream, she seemed to be a particular person I know, who, in fact, a former student of mine. And the central part of the dream involved an episode where I could look out through the top of the car, it was at night, and see the whole dome of the sky very vividly. And the stars seemed to be extremely close. I could see them not as points of light, but as spheres, as solid spheres. And I could make out all kinds of details, such as the rings on planets like Saturn and Jupiter, which one wouldn't normally see. Even in the dream itself, I remember being very, very struck by this, very impressed by this. I remember remarking to my companion that it would be a beautiful night for going for a walk.
This dream begins, I'm driving by night with a female companion. Therefore, he is not at home. He's not in his professional situation at the university. He's not milling around in a pub with other people. He is driving at night with a female companion. And there one could then ask him, how does one feel in such a situation? That's a situation where one relaxes, where one puts aside one's daily worries. One is open to nature, one is open to seeing something new, or it depends on the relationship to the feminine companion, what else one has in mind. But it suggests also possibly a love situation, or at least a situation of positive companionship, in contrast to intellectual effort or social amusement or so on. And it is night. Then we have to say, well, ask ourselves, what is it in the night? Again, in the night we are inclined to be more open, more romantic, more reflective, because our attention is not drawn away by telephones and outer things. It is a moment of relaxed reflection in general, where also the feeling and the repressed other sides of the personality come up. And now he looks up to the sky. The sky has always been one of the most fascinating sights for mankind. And if we go into the history of mankind, the stars have always been divine figures, gods. Even the Bushmen in the Kalahari Desert see in every star constellation the great hunter or the great god in each constellation. And the stars is the realm where, according to myth, our soul comes from, and where it returns after death. In the stars, and if you think of the history of astrology, and astrology has been spread not only in the West, but also in India, China, and everywhere. In all high civilizations, we have astrological traditions. There, the stars always served to prognosticate the future, to find out the future not only of a person, but of mankind. In China, a whole group of astrologers had to watch the sky day and night and report to the emperor all signs in the sky which were interpreted as relating to the fate of the Chinese empire. And in a similar way, in antiquity, everything was seen in the sky.
Do you feel that the destiny of individuals and societies is related to the constellation in the stars?
The constellations in the sky represent the background constellations of great historical events. As if in our deeper unconscious we are not isolated, we are linked up with the whole of mankind. And mankind is dreaming a dream along, which amounts for the changes in politics and religion and everything. If you think only how much the outlook of mankind has changed in the last 30 years, you see how such big collective changes take place. And to look at the sky could therefore be seen, he's looking at the deeper constellations. Constellations comes from the word stella, star, the togetherness of stars, the deeper constellations of collective and of his own personal life.
Why does the dreamer try to find the constellation in the stars?
He needs an orientation. Where am I in this time? What is my task? And so he looks up to the sky and sees especially this combination of Jupiter and Saturn. Now Saturn, as is well known, is an evildoer. Scorpions, serpents, the donkey and so on belong to his realm. He is a dark, destructive spirit. And Jupiter is in general the star of the kings, of the king of justice, of worldly expansion, of a royal personality, of magnanimity, and all the positive qualities of a royal personality. So what the dream tells the dreamer is that when he looks for the constellation of time and naturally also of his own life, there is a combination of extreme opposites. It's a moment of change, of where destructive and constructive forces are constellated simultaneously. He's only in the first part of the dream, only impressed by the beauty of the nocturnal scene and proposes to go for a walk, leave the car and go for a walk. This is a big step forward. He gives up the mechanical way of moving through life. And when you walk, you are in much closer touch with nature, but you are also very much slowed down. So you go step by step and you feel the country, you feel the earth, you feel the trees and the air around you much better. So that is the positive change which comes around from this vision on the sky.
This idea of finding his orientation in the night sky is repeated in the second part of the dream.
I was standing outside my parents' house, which was in Dover in England, and looking up at the sky at night. And I could see a moon. I think it was a partial moon, a crescent moon of some kind, with 3 very bright stars grouped underneath it, more or less following the curve of the moon. This configuration struck me as very, very unusual, and I wanted to see it more closely. So I looked at it through some kind of lens arrangement. I think I had a simple lens in my hand. When I looked through the lens at the moon and the stars, I then saw the moon as full, and the stars were visible behind the moon through the actual substance of the moon. There were still 3 stars there, visible through the full moon. Then, as I continued to look, I could see the moon divided. It was like the moon appears when it's crescent, but you can see the ghost form of the full moon continuing round the crescent. But the two parts were more completely balanced. They were both substantial. I thought of the division of the moon in this way as some kind of yin-yang symbol. This is the analogy that came to mind.
The moon in historical tradition was always looked at to dominate the transient, changeable world. Above the moon in antiquity, one thought, were the eternal constellations, the realm of the Platonic ideas, so to speak, where nothing changed or only in very long historical processes, while the moon is an ever-changing feminine constellation. It rules over the menstruation of women, of birth and death on earth, over the animals, the tides, and so on. This again can be seen as a collective situation, namely the coming up of the feminine archetype. The whole liberation movement of women on one side, but also a strong feminine element coming up in the psychology of men, is a typical characteristic of our time, and that is shown in this constellation of the moon. The moon is now dominant.
And the 3 stars?
I would think that the 3 stars represent the Christian Trinity, which are 3 male divine powers, and the 4th element is the moon, the feminine, which is excluded. And when the Christian tradition is characterized as being purely patriarchal and purely spirit-oriented. It does not include the feminine, the earth, the body, and all that element which is now coming up. When he looks at it closer, he sees then that the 3 stars are behind the moon, as if they had disappeared behind the moon, and the moon is now covering. They are still shining through, but the moon is now in the forefront, so to speak. And that would be a message that now the feminine comes in the forefront. It's not the Christian Trinity anymore. The Christian Trinity is not eclipsed, but it has to step into the background behind the feminine principle of the moon.
But how does the dream portray the balance between the feminine and masculine principles?
He associates, even in the dream, the drawing of the full moon and the dividing line to where the actual new moon is as the yin-yang symbol, the well-known symbol of the play of opposites in Taoistic philosophy. In that case, the dark side would be dominant and very close to topple over again to the light side. That would be, so to speak, the crucial moment of time where the dark side is dominant in our times and now will turn over to a new light.
At this point in the dream, I went inside the house, and as soon as I'd gone inside, I had the feeling of being a little child again. I was being left alone in the house, and I was worried about the door being locked securely. But at the back of the house, there were no stars visible. In fact, the sky still had the reddish glow of sunset. In fact, the whole of the sky had that deep red glow. I noticed at the back of the house there was some activity going on. My father, in fact, was there unloading some kind of material from a truck at the back of the house. He seemed to be bringing in sand or coal, something like that.
For this type of intellectual man, the tasks of everyday life, cooking, sewing, looking after the kitchen things and money and so on, is a heavy burden. And sand generally carries the association of meaninglessness and sterile earthly things. So to him, up till now, the earth is meaningless, sterile, a bother, so to speak, which he drags along if he has to and would like to avoid it. That is already has been the problem of his father, and now he had to look after that problem of his father, and it is as if the dream says the father is with you. That problem of your father is with you too. You too have this problem. And suddenly the scene switched, but the lorry is unloaded, and that would mean more of that coal or sand is coming. The heaps and heaps of earthly things are going to accumulate, which he will have to deal with. And that is due to the fact that the moon is now dominating the scene. Now the feminine, the changing world is important. And the moon has also to do with the body, and the feminine has to do with the body. Now he has to attend his physical life.
The scene then changed again in the dream, and this time I was in some kind of jet plane or rocket ship, very, very high up. The stratosphere is the identification that came to mind. The sky was still had that deep reddish glow to it. I was stretched out full length in the rocket ship, somehow constrained by having my thumbs hooked into 2 rings. I was alone in this craft, except I had the sense that my father was also there. I knew he was there, although there was no explicit communication between us. At various points while we were on this flight, other similar rocket ships, craft came very close, terrifyingly close, in fact, but they never hit us. There was no danger of a collision. Then I became very, very frightened about something. I couldn't quite identify what the problem was. There was some physical sensation that was affecting me. I thought maybe it was hunger or thirst, and it didn't seem to be that. And eventually I decided it was the extreme rarefication of the air, that it was difficult to breathe.
That has to do with the fact that the dreamer is a professor and that he has obviously a brilliant mind and a far-sighted mind, somebody who doesn't bother about little things but goes really for the essentials of the problem in modern literature and his field. But he himself within that spaceship is terribly confined, especially his thumbs are tied and he can practically not move, and it feels suddenly terribly uncomfortable. The thumb if you think of the fairy tale figure of the thumbling, is the dwarf of the fingers and has mainly to do with creativity, with the creative fantasy. And up till now, he has obviously confined his own creativity. Perhaps he should become a writer on his own instead of studying the writing of other people, or in some other way become more artistically creative. The thumbling or the thumb is also the trickster. It is a spirit which plays tricks to the dominating bourgeois world and enjoys its freedom. All this side, the trickster side, the mischievous side, and the creative side of his personality has been completely confined, probably through his professional situation, and should now be liberated. And so he suddenly realizes that he's confined in his intellectual realm and that the air is very thin to breathe. That we can leave as it is. The air in high-up university circles is very thin to breathe, and the creativity is hampered. So the positive message he receives from the dream in the end, the last sentence is always the solution, if there is a solution, says that he realizes he has to come down to Earth. He has to leave the spaceship and turn to Earth.
Would you talk about how the dream relates not just to his own personal life, but to the much larger problem with the feminine in our time?
The dream mainly first answers questions which he must have had in his conscious mind, namely deep questions. What is the situation of our time? In what kind of age do we live? If you are concerned with modern literature, this naturally haunts you too, because the whole of modern literature is concerned with the problem of our time, or most of it. And poets have also always been prophets, so there's always a secret longing to read in modern literature the signs of the time, so to speak. And it answers that, and only towards the end of both dreams it returns to his life situation, as if the dream would make a big excursion into the situation of our time is that the feminine, the body, the earthly, the ever-changing material world is now becoming important and has to be lovingly attended to. And then the dream would go on, and for you that means you should come out of your spaceship and return to Earth.
This dream closely parallels the dream of King Gilgamesh that we looked at earlier. It seems strange that the dream of an ancient Sumerian king could be so closely connected to the problems of a modern dreamer. Would you compare the two dreams?
The dreamer of this modern dream also is in the situation where the first half of life, the tasks of the first half of life have been fulfilled, and now he's looking to the sky for orientation. And the first thing he sees is the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, which hasn't yet directly to do with him, but only tells him that he belongs to the age of extreme opposites, and that Saturn, who is more linked with the animal man and the drives, and the spiritual man are in opposition, or are in Christianity not united. And then comes the second part of his dream where he sees the moon, the feminine principle, and after that he realizes suddenly that he's in a spaceship and has to go down to Earth. We can say that this realization at the end of his dream, that he has to come down to earth, is exactly what Gilgamesh had to realize after the star had fallen upon him. Namely, he had to realize and make friends with the earthly man, who, by the way, in Gilgamesh epic, first attacked Gilgamesh. Enkidu attacked Gilgamesh, and they first had a big battle before they made friends, and then went for their heroic journey together. And so we can expect that this dreamer too will now have to meet the earthly man, alluded to in the figure of his father who is carrying a sack of sand or coals. That is the load of earthly tasks and bodily existence that he has to realize before he can go on to fulfill his fate. And his fate will have to do with an integration of the feminine principle, which is the moon. That is different to this Gilgamesh epic. At that time, the matriarchal world of unconsciousness had to be overcome by the hero. And nowadays, 4,000 years later, the situation is reversed. The feminine principle has to be integrated. But in both situations, the star and the appearance of the star has to do with the fact of trying to read or realize the unique meaning of one's own importance within the cosmos. We are just a particle of dust somewhere on a particle, living on a particle of dust somewhere in the cosmic universe. And if we look from scientific and collective standards at our life, it is completely transient and meaningless. But if we look within and if we look at the stars, then we come to realize that within that cosmic infiniteness, we have a unique task to fulfill, which we generally experience as what we call the meaning of our life.
Now, we've been dealing with the shadow as the same gender as the ego. We're going to move now to the contrasexual in the man. This, of course, is going to be the feminine, the anima, as Jung called it, the Latin word for soul. That part which Jung calls the archetype of life, that brings creativity, joy, the value of living into his life.
The anima in her developed form connects a man to the source of his being. That is, his feelings are individual. They're connected to who he really is. They're not just reactions to outer life. In these dreams, we're going to see the feminine component of the male psyche transforming into a link that connects the dreamer to the source of life. This dreamer uses music to help understand his dreams.
Lady, lady, on the cross, was it I that crucified you? And am I to up there beside you, like a robber to deride you, luster mixed with dross? Pregnant lady on the cross, will the man-child that's within you, bursting forth all stiffening sinews, live his life but not unpin you, gain but at what a cost? In this act I play the pilot, lifting the curtain for a start. Author and producer, there's nothing finer than to be both audience and stage designer.
This is one of the most striking dreams I ever had in my whole life, and it's lived with me ever since I had it. I dreamt of a crucifixion in a medieval mystery play. They were rehearsing the play in a church in modern times, and two actresses were nailing the Christ figure to the cross. The cross was lying flat in the transept of the church in the middle, and you could hear the sound of nailing, which was terrifying, and yet somehow they weren't really nailing the person, they were tying onto the cross. And then when that was finished, they raised the cross up in the church, and the figure on the cross was very high. It was extremely dangerous for that person. And then the scene changes, and it's the actual performance in the church. The actor who will play the Christ comes solemnly processing down the church, and to my amazement, it's a woman. And not only that, but it's a woman who is my wife, although not my actual wife in reality. She comes down the church, she's dressed in just a simple grey cloak held at the neck with a brooch, and she's heavily pregnant. The whole crucifixion scene is repeated as in the rehearsal, and she's raised up high. It's very moving and absolutely magnificent. Then the scene changes again, and it's after the play, and we're walking home with a number of other people whom I don't remember. I look across to my wife, who's standing, walking on my left-hand side. She has fair, short-cropped hair and a slim, boyish figure despite the pregnancy, and she reminded me, I thought afterwards, very much of the actress Jean Seberg in the film of Joan of Arc. As I look at her, I'm filled with pride and love for her, but none of this I say to her. I keep it all to myself, and then the dream ends.
That's quite a dream.
Before we go into the dream, we have to look at the fact that the main figure of the dream is the wife of the dreamer, but it's not his actual wife. It is another figure which he later associates with Joan of Arc and who is pregnant. So if somebody dreams of his husband or wife and they look quite differently, they are a different figure, it means the inner wife or the inner husband. In other words, the main animus or anima figure to whom they are, so to speak, always married inwardly. It's the inner marriage and the inner wife. And here the dream runs that first there is a kind of mystery play which enacts the crucifixion of Christ. But it's only acting. It is a bit dangerous because the cross is high, but actually it's only acting. This illustrates exactly the situation of the religious situation of our time. Christianity has become, on one way, a historical reminiscence for most people. A mystery play reenacts medieval plays in a medieval form, so as if we would rehearse some of our historical past, and also it is an outer imitation. There has always been the problem that the churches have taught us to imitate Christ in the wrong way, namely to imitate his outer actions. I would rather call that to ape Christ. And this aping of Christ has not gone under our skin. We have not become Christianized. If you look at the history of the Western world and its wars and bloody fights, you see that the Christianization has not reached us at all. We are Christians with our lips and outwardly, but when it comes to psychological facts, we are complete pagan barbarians. And that is because we only ape Christ outwardly. We make pious historical reminiscences. We read the Gospels. We have the Gospels repeated in church. And nobody is reached by it, or many people are not reached by it, are not touched. It doesn't go under their skin at all.
Peter, how do you approach your own dreams to give them meaning?
Well, I approach my own dreams by trying to learn as much about them and their setting as I can to begin with. That's to say, for instance, with regard to this dream, I had in fact been to a performance of a passion play in a church earlier in the year, and so some of the that situation will come into what I feel about the dream and so forth. For another example, I must work out what I feel about this Jean Seberg kind of boyish, womanish figure that seems to be important for me, not only in this dream but in others that I've had, and so forth. I try and work around what I know about the motifs in the dream. Then I try and get to, it's important for me to try and move the dream around, to try and get bits that I don't know, because the dream is certainly trying to tell me something that I don't know. And so one way of doing this is to paint pictures of it. I, in fact, painted a picture of this dream. But for me, the most important way that I've always used is to write songs about my dreams, to take, perhaps not the whole dream, but to take a piece of the dream as the beginnings, the origins of a song, which I write with just using the guitar and strum to myself. And then, once I've got the song, then I look at the song and see in what way has the song expanded the dream, in what way has it moved me on, in what way has it got me deeper into that actual image of the woman on the cross, the pregnant woman on the cross.
Lady, lady on the cross, was it I that crucified you? And am I too up there beside you, like a robber to deride you, luster mixed with dross? When I'm down and at a loss, that's the time that I seek to free you. But give me the strength to nail and be you, splayed upon that suffering tree, you pregnant lady of the cross, pregnant lady of the cross, pregnant lady of the cross.
You always talk about the essence of a dream message, right? The dream's got an essence. What's the essence of the dream message for him?
This dream tells the dreamer that now something unusual is going to happen. Namely, this mysterious wife, pregnant wife of his, is going to be crucified in the place of Christ. And he trembles in realizing the solemn performance. That is the solemn and crucial moment where we can see that the Christian teaching or the mystery of what Christ represents reaches his own soul.
This dream told me a number of things. The initial thing it said to me was that the feeling of being crucified, of part of me being crucified, was not just a negative one, but that it was creative. There was a pregnancy in it. There was a pregnancy involved, of which I, the dreamer, was proud. As it says at the end of the dream, I was very proud of this performance that had been put on. So it told me that no matter how I felt in real life, there was something of value in that feeling, and that I should try and look for it and search for it. And that was, at the time, as I remember, tremendously important for me. It was, it actually made me feel better about my songs. It made me feel able to play my songs to other people, because I felt there was something in value that I could create. At a later time, something else came to me, which was that one could also say she didn't belong up there. That's a dangerous place to be. And she's going to have a baby. And if she had a baby when she was on the cross, that wouldn't be very nice. So the dream is also saying she's got to come off the cross. She's got to be taken down and taken care of and looked after, and in order that the baby can be born. So that was a second thing that came to me, that I had to pay much more attention and value to these sides of my personality.
In Jungian psychology, we use the word soul. And usually that word's thought about within a theological context. Could you interpret this dream in such a way that the psychological meaning of the word soul would be clear?
This inner wife of his, who is crucified, is the dreamer's soul. It is his anima. And the anima in a man means also his feeling, personality, his sensitivity, his awareness of inner things. If a man has a positive relationship to his anima, he is sensitive, he is aware of inner things, he is receptive to the spiritual processes in the depth of the psyche. That is his anima. And the crucifixion, which is the being extended between the opposites to suffer the utmost clash of opposites. The cross is this, the two opposites clashing together. That's why when Christ was on the cross, he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He was absolutely torn between the opposites. He blotted out between the opposites. This central teaching of the Christian mystery is now going to be realized by his soul. It will happen in him. And that means he will suffer it, he will go through it, and he will begin to then feel that the Christian teaching is a psychological reality. It's not some gesture out there which we have to ape, or some kind of conventional behavior which is being taught to us by parsons and priests. It is something which touches our and concerns our innermost psychic being.
The important thing is that it's not easy, because you can't just say, this is my inner femininity, I found it, I've got it, good, it's in my pocket, now I don't have to bother anymore. You have to, that's only the beginning, because if you're going to take that, you have to give up some of your achievement, and then you're going to feel bad about that. And so all the time it's a conscious, difficult struggle. It's a pendulum that swings to and fro from one side to another, and each time it hurts, because each time it means giving up something that is you.
Christ has always been thought of as a masculine symbol, yet the dream uses Christ to represent the dreamer's femininity.
It has always been taught by certain Christian mystics that we should be Christified, that the true imitation of Christ is to become Christ ourselves, to be transformed into Christ ourselves inwardly or psychologically. And that is now what the dream predicts is happening to the dreamer. Now he will be a Christian. After that experience, he will know what it means to be crucified between the opposite, and he will know what it means to carry his own cross and to carry his own destiny to the ultimate. Christ, in a way, is the model of a man who went alone along with his own fate and carried his own cross and fulfilled his own task without wavering or giving in to any collective pressure. That's why we worship him as a man who has become God, as God having become man in him. He carries out that. And the dreamer is now reached by the Christian teaching is, so to speak, reaching his soul now. He associates this crucified woman with Joan of Arc, which is an appropriate association, because Joan of Arc herself was such a crucified figure. Joan of Arc went also, she didn't ape Christ, she imitated Christ in the right way, in living her own destiny, individual destiny, right through the cross and right through even outer death.
I'm curious to know what you'll have to say about this dream. It's, I think, the most beautiful dream I ever had. I dreamt that I was walking along beside this enormous river. Swift current, and the light was flashing back off the water. And I looked up a hill, and on top of the hill was a castle. It was surrounded by a moat. I went across the drawbridge into the castle and into a central courtyard, in the center of which was a well, and a woman was sitting on the wall of this well. And she had a ladle, and she lowered the ladle down into the well and held it out to me. I took it and drank the water, and then she dipped again and gave it to me a second time. And then the third time, she repeated the same procedure. And then I sat down on the edge of the well facing her. She had on this gorgeous blue dress, a very, very beautiful woman. And I just had this feeling of peace. And I woke up.
We have seen before that the dream world and the unconscious psyche shows its positive face only to us if we go with life, if we don't refuse to live. We go. We speak of the river often as the flow of life, the flow of time. Time is a river which ends in the ocean of eternity. Life is a river, it begins with a youthful spring and finally ends in the sea of the Godhead, and so on. It's a famous simile for the ever-moving, ever-changing facts of life, which are really the ever-moving changing of our psychic element, substance which carries us. We think a minute of the strange thing that our ego consciousness is every night blotted out for hours and returns identical the next morning. Why should you not wake up and be somebody else? You are completely continuous yourself. So there's something which carries us through, apparently, which carries our identity through all life. Our body changes its cells. We have practically no old cells in our body left after 7 years, and still we remain ourselves. There's something like an essential psychic substance in us which carries us through in our identity, and that is this mysterious flow of life. That's the river. And there he meets the woman at the well, and one naturally thinks of Christ's conversation with the Samaritan woman. That is also the beautiful historical example of the meeting of the Christ, one of the few meetings where Christ in a meaningful way encounters the feminine and takes up contact with it.
What's the meaning of the dream being said in the medieval castle?
The anima in her developed form is in man the capacity for love, in contrast to the power drive. It is loving for love's sake in the highest form. That's why this woman appears in a medieval castle surrounded by a moat, because that in medieval time, in the so-called French cour d'amour, courts of love, there was the first time in the Western Christian civilization a realization of the anima. There, each knight elected a woman of his choice, which was not his wife, and who represented his beloved anima figure, and he made poems for her, and he did his heroic deeds for her, and he worshipped her like a goddess. And that at the same time was those men grew out of their barbarian warriors' behavior and became cultivated people who, men who could really relate to women, men who cultivated their capacity of love, their sensitivity. And that's why this is the time of the Grail legends, of the troubadours, of the story of Tristan and Isolde, and these love traditions. The church didn't like this development because it led to all sorts of complications, and it made people a bit too independent from her. And so it was suppressed, and interestingly enough, when those cours d'amour were suppressed, the witch hunting began. The feminine became negative, and one began to pursue alluring, interesting women as witches, because one had suppressed a beginning development of love life. That is why when we now are confronted with the problem of renewing the relationship between the sexes and finding new forms of relating between men and women, we have to historically go back to the Middle Ages, to that where the problem has been left over in this castle in the moat. There the problem has been deserted and left for a one-sided masculine rational development of the West, and therefore we have to return to that. And for instance, the whole romanticism of the hippie movement was such a first attempt. That's why they were imitated troubadours with music instruments and even revived troubadour music. That was all going back that now the anima development is most important for men, and the animus development for women.
And what about the ladles of water that the beautiful lady offers?
The only action of the dream, because that dream in first line speaks through its beauty and its feeling value, and needs not much rational explanation. The only action is that the anima figure 3 times give the dreamer some of the water of life to drink. The anima has the water of life, and the water of life is, well, that is difficult to define, but you can say most people experience, sometimes they feel when they feel well, they say they feel alive. Even if they might have sufferings and difficulties in their life, there are times where people feel alive. And then when people are in a neurotic fix or in some trouble, they say, I'm dead, I'm inwardly dead, I don't live. This shows that being alive is not only a physical fact, it is a psychic fact. Being alive is, we are alive when we feel alive. And what makes us feel alive is the contact with that flow of the unconscious psyche. That's why dreams are so important. You can say, you could even refer that deeper with a bit of water of life to say each ladle full of water of life is a dream. That's what a dream is. We get every night, so to speak, a sip of the water of life. And if we understand the dream, then we are vivified. And then we feel alive. We feel in contact with our psychic depth and with our own living substance. And then we subjectively feel that life is flowing, that we are alive.
When I'm down and at a loss, that's the time that I seek to free you. But give me the strength to nail and be you, splayed upon that suffering tree, you pregnant lady of the cross, pregnant lady of the cross, pregnant lady of the cross.
I think it is important to note in our culture, when the word feminine is used, people automatically think we're talking about women. This was not so in ancient cultures. The Indian Hindus knew that they were working towards a balance between Shiva and Shakti in divine embrace. In China, the yin and the yang were always, the attempt was made to bring them into balance. Those of you who do the I Ching, that is the whole understanding behind balancing the yin with some yang, the yang with some yin. In the Christian world, we go to the abstract to balance the transcendent and the immanent. Yes, we do need a new vocabulary. These two words are too tied to sexuality. Masculine and feminine have become sexual words. But the fact remains that in our dreams, the masculinity is imaged in the male, the femininity is imaged in the female. Instead of putting all our energy into worrying about new language, we need also to look at the dreams, where the macho man is raping the feminine in himself, in other people, in the earth, or where the woman, the phallic woman, is doing the same thing, raping the feminine in herself, in her man, and in Mother Earth. What does it look like in a man when his femininity begins to develop? When his growing anima begins to separate out from mother? When that cold cat begins to develop a sweet and loving face? When he is no longer interested in his Don Juan escapades? How does his outer attitude change? When the little boy has outgrown the phallic witch and the deadening laws of patriarchy? What happens when he begins to experience his own values in his own being? Being is the feminine principle. Doing is the masculine principle. For me, patriarchy has become a parody of masculinity. It is focused on power. Power over, even power over one's own body. Masculinity is a focused, discriminating, fiery, creative energy that loves the feminine, cherishes the feminine. If the feminine principle were present at the board table, how would it change our ecological laws? What would happen to modern pig farms, chicken farms, stockyards? What would happen on our whole planet if we could believe that God has a wife? While you are looking at our shadow nose, it is important to remember that the shadow is not always dark, mean, dangerous, evil. Shadow for Jung means those parts of the same gender self that are still in the unconscious, unknown to our conscious ego. These can be parts of ourselves that have been put down since we were tiny children. Parts of ourselves that we were made fun of, bewildered by, kept out of a peer group, We buried these parts and hoped we would never see them again. Forgotten them. Often the sad part is that they are in our unconscious. And like ugly little toads, they come splatting out. We don't even know we've said them, but we suddenly realize that everyone around us is angry. We don't understand why. It's very important sometimes to talk to each other about our little toads. Now, the shadow is the same gender as the ego. We're going to move now to the contrasexual in the man, what Jung calls the anima, the Latin word for soul. This is the part of him that will become the divine inner energy. It can move in several directions. As we look at this anima, she can move. Let me use this. As we look at this anima, and you see how this pendulum swings, you can see that there is a ratio on both sides. That it does move the same on the one side as on the other. Think of a complex that way. Think of a person who is projecting a goddess, a divine goddess, onto someone, and the energy becomes shifting because she is not a divine goddess, she is human. But that is a terrible disappointment to the person. So the other side comes up, and she may appear as an enchantress, someone who will not let him go, or even an animal, often a sick animal, who will not let him go, or something that will keep him asleep. The relationship to the mother will determine the relationship to this contrasexual. And one has to always be aware that the more intense on the positive side, the equally intense negative energy. Jung realized that the young feminine would be, as it were, a shadow side of that mother energy. When she begins to appear in dreams, often it's a little girl or a young girl or a little dark girl, and she comes out, and of course the energy may be projected. That's the tendency. What's coming out of the unconscious is projected onto someone. But that's fine, because then we begin to see who that is in us, what we are projecting. Now, she may say to you, if you're a man, that's not who I am at all. But from your point of view, yes, indeed, that is who she is, because that is your projection. We don't project intentionally. It's like an arrow that just comes out, flies directly to the bullseye, and then the two people involved have to deal with that. When the energy becomes that one can really see what's going on, and you begin to pull it back, it becomes an inner muse. For example, a woman may dream that her husband is going off every night and she's afraid he's having an affair. She can even maybe see the woman in her dreams. Very often he is going to his music studio or someplace where he can write, where he can actually work with his own inner bride. This is very confusing in a relationship. In fact, some of you may say, well, what's the point of all of this? why bother making a relationship with this inner feminine if it's going to upset the outer marriage? It won't upset it if you stay with it. If you are projecting goddess onto someone, that divinity is your hope and your goal, but it's totally an illusion. No human being is a goddess. And the dark side will come out of that projection and turn against the person who is projecting. So to bring that energy in, recognize it as internal, is to bring out your own creativity. You write with that energy, you go into life with that energy, you create music, art, whatever whatever it is that brings you into your full maturity. More than that, in the marriage, the expectation is taken off. You no longer expect her to be who you want her to be, the goddess that you think she is. You begin to see her as she in fact is. And there's great beauty in human love. The anima really is the archetype of life. She is the principle of feeling and love in the relationship, by which I mean a presence that can look at the man and love him for who he is, for what he values. It's not what she is projecting onto him, but she loves what is coming forth in him and can put a love around that relationship that brings out the very strength of all his creative masculinity.